Yeah, thanks. Thank you for all coming back on time. Um, we'll now continue a bit in the theme that we were following in the last presentation, that is looking at the activities of multinationals. But this time, rather than looking across the European statistical system, we have a presentation first by Ronald Nelies from Statistics Netherlands. I think he's going to give a national accounts perspective. And then we have Eric Boulet from the international account side, from the balance of payments side, giving another perspective on new work they've done on the recording of multinationals in the Canadian statistics. And these will be followed by Francisco Guillain Martin, who will make a presentation on the data sharing of multinationals and how they have achieved some of this data sharing with the agreement of companies and other initiatives that they've been quite successful in INEGI in Mexico, in line with the recommendations of the group, the working group, or the task force on data sharing that was recently completed its work here at UNECE. So I'll just give the floor to you, Ronald, when you're ready to begin on this your presentation on recording the impact of M&Es in Netherlands. So when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you also for the opportunity to say a few words on our work on multinationals. Maybe for those unfamiliar with the Netherlands, I just have added here two graphs on how the impact is, the international impact is on national accounts. You see here trade in goods and services with very, very high flows relative to GDP, which is approaching 80%.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you speak a little louder,
Yeah.
please? Thank you.
Sure. Another graph with showing the SBE activity in the Netherlands. There's large SBEs in the Netherlands with 25% of liabilities rounded about, and that is despite the fact that we have actually a sizable financial sector. So international flows is certainly not new, but I think when you look at what happened the last 2 years, there's certainly been increased awareness about the role of multinationals in the economy. For example, because of what happened in Ireland a few years ago, we had the same kind of things happening in our benchmark revision in 2015, just smaller amounts. So it's really raised the awareness for us that we need to look better at multinationals. So what I'd like to present to you this for me afternoon is first of all the results of a study on corporate conversions and trade in intellectual property in multinationals, which was financed by the Dutch Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Social Affairs. And secondly, to present the first results of a feasibility study that we're currently doing on compiling data on multinationals for the multinational corporate sector. And this is partly financed by Eurostat. Corporate versions, it's something that, when a corporation changes residency, it's something that does not need to be particularly difficult for a corporation. It's rather a legal procedure, and as a result, we would not expect large changes in GDP. There's not much productive activities changing, at least not initially. The GNI impact can be a lot larger, especially when we're talking about quoted entities, because of the impact of reinvested earnings. A new global group head will own all reinvested earnings from a global group. But if it's a quoted entity, actually all these earnings may remain in the new country of the new global group head. And this illustrates, I think, that the relevance of discussions currently, where you look at the SMA and BPM on how to define reinvested earnings and whether or not to include portfolio investment. Because currently, if you have a quoted entity which has a changed residency, this is actually going to have having a fairly artificial impact on GNI when there is no real difference, no real changes. Well, considering the impact, we focused on quoted entities. Don't want to go into detail about how we selected them. there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But just going forward to the results, which shows that certainly from 2013 onwards, we clearly see impact from corporate inversions on our balance of primary income, eventually going to about 10 billion. Um, so there is an increasing activity in global inversions towards the Netherlands, and because they become also more profitable, then you see that the balance of primary income is clearly higher uh, uh, in a new situation than if there were not have been any kind of corporate inversion.
Sorry,
We
Ronald,
also
could I ask you
yeah.
to speak closer to the microphone? I think the interpreters are having some problems picking up all of what you're saying. Sorry to repeat this.
Okay.
Okay.
No problem. Just need to speak up. When we look at property, intellectual property, multinationals can shift intellectual property between countries. This can be done, for example, because of fiscal treatments, and this shift in IP can have impact on GDP, for example, or well, because of royalties and licensing having impact on output and immediate consumption. And if you look at the consumption of fixed capital, that can have a significant extra impact on GNI. So we looked at the data that we actually have in the Netherlands was not so much about imports and exports of IP. So we needed to find another way to make calculations. And what we did was we looked at the turnover of royalties and licensing fees relative to employees and saying, okay, if you have a lot of output of such services and you don't have much employees in the Netherlands, then there, well, it's at least a good idea that we need to study these corporations further and to see whether there was import of IP. Obviously, this limits our study a little bit. For example, we could not really study Dutch multinationals as there were simply basically too many employees in the Netherlands. Still, I think if you look at our results, our impression was, and what we know from the Netherlands, is that our study it probably has a good coverage. Overall, what we found, there were about 30 corporations where we could find purchased IP. Relative to GDP, if you look at the graph, you see that there's 3 billion or perhaps 4 billion at some point in time relative to a GDP that is somewhere between 650 and 750 billion. So that's not particularly large, you could say. But then when you look at some graphs like this, the gross fixed capital formation, you see that with the trade in IP, we have a really large spike in 2015 and also something happening in 2013 and 14. So these series look really different with trade in IP. And also because of this, the trade imbalance goods and services also has a large impact here. So overall, we think about whether the corporate inversions in trade and IP have so much influence on GDP and GNI in the Netherlands that these kind of macroeconomic data are not usable. That's not what we found. I think in general we could say, okay, this is still manageable with 1.2% in 2017 impact GNI by corporate inversions and the impact of relocation of IP. Well, it's also manageable. But if you look at terms of billions of euros and how the absolute numbers, that we're still talking about significant numbers of these two phenomena. And it also means that, well, considering the large flows that we've seen through the Netherlands of international flows, and considering the study that we just did, we felt that it was good to do a more thorough study, also to look better at the role that multinationals have in income and in saving. And one way of doing this is by splitting the non-financial corporation sector into subsectors, which is also something that aligns with what international statistical developments are doing, and also the user demands. Multinationals can be split into various subsectors. The typical subsectors are public non-financial corporations, national private non-financial corporations, and foreign controlled corporations. Um, but obviously, well, the foreign controlled corporations can be seen as foreign multinationals, but the Dutch multinationals or multinationals with local owners, they will not be covered this proposed subsector. So what we did is instead make another split and split it into Dutch multinationals, large corporations, and small and medium-sized corporations, which I think in itself is also an interesting grouping. Then we try to combine all the macroeconomic data that we had into what I would call full microdata approach to combine all the statistics available of national accounts, for example, structural business statistics, investment statistics, and also labor statistics, and to combine all that to try to align the micro data with national accounts. And as a result, then would also have to do the allocation of all balancing adjustments to individual corporations. If you have this aligned, all this microdata aligned to national accounts, then if you classify all the enterprise into enterprise groups, then you can basically add up all the microdata and you have your subset. So we're still working on finishing the study. We hope to publish it in a few months, and which would have the time frame from 2015-2017. But just to show a few preliminary findings, 50% of value added of the non-financial corporation sector in the Netherlands proves to be actually by multinationals, both Dutch multinationals as well as foreign multinationals. We found that foreign multinationals are actually the most profitable corporations within the non-financial corporations. Certainly a lot profitable, more profitable than small and medium-sized enterprises. And when you look at Dutch multinationals, also, well, and when you look at savings, which is very relevant for the Dutch non-financial corporation sector, we see that both Dutch multinationals as well as small and medium-sized enterprises are actually net savers. And what we also found, and which was also part of the reason to do the study, is that when you make subsectors and you identify the foreign controlled corporations, that is also a way to estimate the GNI impact, or basically the GNI impact that should not be there because of the reinvested earnings calculation. So now we've done this through our study, we can see that there's actually reason to suspect that there might be some overestimate. This is still, well, something that we need to look into further and to really quantify this impact carefully in relation to GNI reservations. But just to give you a little bit of an idea, what were the causes of the expected GNI impact, is that basically we do align the supply and use tables and sector accounts. So we publish the same data, but this is a macroeconomic alignment. And now if you look at it from micro perspective, actually there are differences in compilation procedures for the two systems. Both systems, there might be some incomplete coverage. One entity might be covered in the supply and use tables and with a lesser coverage in sector accounts. So then you get different data for the reinvested earnings. Also the methodological adjustments, for example, for capitalization of research and development, that should increase profits for multinational corporations and subsequently should increase also the reinvested earnings. However, what we felt or what we saw is that the consumption of fixed capital in corporate statements actually is also a lot lower than what we calculate in the virtual inventory method. So overall, actually capitalization did not have that much influence on the reinvested earnings. But finally, also the balancing adjustments in the supply and use tables and sector accounts. These tend to be macroeconomic adjustments, but of course, macroeconomic adjustment then at some point should feed into also the reinvestment calculation. So overall, concluding remarks, I think for us, the subsector of the financial corporation sector is feasible for the current and capital account. It's still a bit resource intensive in the way we've done it so far. So we need to find some improvement there, but it's certainly feasible. There are a few issues, for example, the coverage for microdata, income transfers, which is not well covered. Also, the accrual accounting for interest is a bit of an issue if you start looking at microdata corporations. And also, the continuing work is needed to improve the registers of foreign controlled corporations. Certainly for the time frame that we were looking at, we didn't have a complete list of all corporations that were actually foreign owned. But overall, thorough subsectoring estimates offer certainly new insights into developments in the NFC sector in the Netherlands. Also, as I said, about small and medium-sized enterprises. But it certainly can also be a significant quality enhancement for macroeconomic aggregates. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Ronald. Yes, this is a very interesting presentation. I think it's a feature of the guidance notes we've issued from the Globalization Task Team looking at this subsectoring. So it's nice to see this work in that context. We'll have the first two we'll have the other two presentations, and then we'll take questions together then, because there's a lot of common themes between yourself and Eric's presentation from Statistics Canada. So I'll ask Eric if he is ready to take the floor, and then we'll follow that with Francisco and take all of the presentations together. I just say to participants that please take this opportunity to ask questions. There's a lot of interesting questions that you could ask Ronald, and I'm sure could be asked of Eric too. And don't hesitate. Please put them up in the chat, and Jennifer will get to them then. Okay, thank you. Okay, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. May I ask someone maybe to open the presentation for me?
Great, there it is.
Truly appreciated. Thank you very much. So thanks, Michael, again, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present on our experience in developing a mini program in Canada. So StatsCan has undertaken work in recent years to enhance statistics on multinational enterprises to better assess their role in Canadian and foreign economies. The presentation today will describe the approach that we've used in the creation of a very rich data set at the end. And the project is part of a broader initiative to enhance the overall relevance of the international accounts in Canada. Next slide, please. So first, I will briefly describe the broader context in which the multinational initiative took place, which is the project to develop an extended and more agile international accounts program at StatsCan. I will also describe the approach and the scope of the mini program in Canada and present some results at the end if time permits, of course. Next slide. So in Canada, the International Accounts Program was created at a time when simple two-way merchandise trade accounted for the vast majority of cross-border transactions and was also the primary focus of policymakers. Now users are increasingly interested in a variety of other elements, many of which are quite complex in nature, and not necessarily well reflected in the core statistics. So the need to enhance the overall relevance of the accounts became clear a few years ago in Canada, and a project was launched. The importance of this exercise was fully recognized and supported by our partners, and funding also was secured back in 2018 for this project. 5 main areas of transformation were targeted: trade and services, firms' characteristics, impacts of FDI, which is the focus of the presentation today, globalization and financial exposure in relation with the work of the G20 DGI Phase 2 initiative. Next slide, please. So an ambitious plan was put in place back in 2018 to enhance the international accounts products in each of the 5 areas targeted. Depending on the products, the goal was to increase the relevance using various strategies by either adding details to existing aggregates that we were publishing, improving the timeliness of some products, increasing the accessibility of our statistics as well, which was identified as an issue from our users. And the last one being developing new products that can be seen as extensions to the core external sector statistics in Canada by the use of more innovative methods, which is the case for the multinational enterprise program that we've developed. Next slide, please. So about the M&E program in Canada, we have to go back to 1999 to see the first component of this program being established. And at that time, the program was covering activities of Canadian majority-owned affiliates abroad only. The data were collected through survey activities, and it was essentially to respond back in those days to specific needs of our Department of Foreign Affairs. It took a while before we initiated the work to launch the second component in 2015, as the demand for such information was increasing. So that second component covered the activities of foreign multinationals in Canada. And this component was built entirely from record linkage techniques, by also leveraging the robust statistical infrastructure available in the agency. Finally, it is in 2019 that we completed the work and released a full multinational program, including the activities of Canadian multinationals in Canada, again by using a similar record linkage approach. Next slide, please. So the most crucial step in the development of the program was really the elaboration of a comprehensive frame of multinationals, which formed the foundation of this program. While the FDI frame provided a good starting point, we did take advantage of new sources of information, an extensive use of tax data and even commercial databases more recently, to create a comprehensive frame of multinationals. Obviously, this work also highly benefited the existing FDI program and did ensure also the coherence between the two programs. The frame of M&E was then fully also integrated into the Statistics Canada's centralized business register, and a flag was created for these firms, making the information available to other statistical programs in the agency as well. Next slide, please. So once the frame was built, the next step consisted in linking a set of economic indicators coming from a variety of existing statistical programs in the agency to the frame of multinationals. Obviously, the work was facilitated by the use of the centralized business register, which provides common identifiers for enterprises and allows the efficient sharing of data sources across the agency. So the end result was a detailed M&E database containing a rich set of financial variables and economic variables, as you can see on the slide, as well as the segmentation of the whole business population in Canada between multinational firms, whether they are Canadian or foreign owned, and non-multinationals also at the firm level. So as the previous presentation, the approach was a full micro data approach one. Next slide. So one of the key benefits of the business register in Canada is the access to the full statistical structure of Canadian enterprises and their establishments. So it is indeed possible to generate multinational data at the establishment level, in addition to the enterprise level, for some economic indicators, such as trade, employment, and value added, for example. With the availability of establishment data, more accurate and relevant subnational and industrial breakdown can be produced for our users, given that an enterprise can have operations in multiple provinces and various industries. And this information is quite interesting, an interesting complement to the FDI data to inform on impacts of FDI at regional level, something that our users have been asking for a very long time, essentially. Next slide, please. There are, of course, a number of challenges that we're facing in the compilation of the M&E data. The first one being that not all our economic indicators are currently available on the basis of the SMA BOP concepts. Obviously, this is something crucial to be able to fully integrate the M&E as an institutional sector in the macroeconomic accounts, something that we've discussed this morning and that is being discussed in the context of the review of the international manuals. The second one also is the data from supplying programs, which are most of the time based on sample surveys and not census. So developing techniques to adjust weights before introducing the survey data to the M&E frame is, of course, another challenge that we're facing. Timeliness for now is likely the most important gap of the program being identified by our users. Data for 2018 were made available at the end of 2020, last year. The issue is really to develop the methodology to update the frame until the full data sources become available, as well as the timeliness of some of the economic indicators, of course. And finally, a fairly general one is publishing more details while preserving confidentiality is always an ongoing challenge. We've made some good progress on that front in recent years, but some challenges remain in this area to make the sharing of our data set more easy with our users.
Eric, you have 2 minutes left.
That's great. So I'm going to cut on the results part. We can maybe go to the next slide just to show you quickly the next slide, please. So in terms of number, there's a fairly limited number of multinationals in Canada, less than 30,000, but their contribution is quite important. If we go to the next slide, you will see that, about half of the value added in Canada is generated by multinationals, almost equally split between Canadian and foreign M&Es. We can go to the next slide. Their contribution in terms of number of jobs, they explain about 1/3 of all the employment in Canada in 2018. And you can see some variability across the regions as well. If we go to the next one. International trade activity is likely the one that for which their contribution is the most important. In terms of goods exports or merchandise export, I should say, about nearly 85% of this whole activity is actually related to multinationals in Canada, with a fairly large proportion being done by foreign multinationals. So I'm going to conclude the presentation here. Thank you very much.
We see a lot of common themes between what you presented there and what Ronald presented from the Netherlands, and very much the same approach, even though we were looking at it from the perspective of the national accounts as opposed to the international accounts of the balance of payments. Okay, Francisco is going to change the theme slightly into the data sharing perspective in relation to multinationals in Mexico. So the floor is yours, Francisco. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. Let me share my presentation, and if you tell me if it's arrived now,
Not yet.
not yet. Okay, no,
Yes.
yes, okay. Well,
Just
let me expand it. Now, well, thank you very much for uh, these moments in relation with the experience that we have in Mexico. And just to give you some specific context and probably a motivation, in the case of Mexico, the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, we received always a lot of requirements in relation with more granular data. And of course, the users needs for its research to know many things in relation with the rest of the world and some specific sectors or some international relationships and other views according with the decision taking that has to put on the table for different institutions, and that is one of the most challenge that we have. And in our case, we just want to show in this moment only two examples in relation with the response on that demands and the views that we are working on data sharing and to improve the granularity and the treatment of some specific works with the North American trading value added views. And in our case, one of the most important things is to produce information for the users and the users to exploit this information in relation with some specific uh, topics, and of course that means a good relation with some conceptual. And in the case of Mexico, the National Statistical Office is in charge of the national accounts, and of course that give us some inputs to put inside of the national accounts. And of course, again, we could extend the analysis of the national accounts. And in the case of the Mexican automotive industry, as an example, association, the administrative record of the light vehicle automotive industry is a good example for for both communication and data sharing among private enterprises, private multinational enterprises. And in this case, we have a good relationship with them, and we could sign the memorandum of understanding that. And this is a tool to get a granular level of sales, production, and export, for example. And of course, these terms of reference are very important, but and in this case, all the companies must deliver the information each month. And we have a calendar here. And of course, we have to look one of the challenge in relation with the confidentiality, with the trademarks, and of course the films has to do at the same moment the information, and they have to give us the information at one moment to publish that in granular views. Of course, this are part of one of our examples, but that means that we could get some specific indicators in relation with sales, production, and exports, and we could share. And of course, this is one of the examples that we use according with the guide of sharing economic data for the official statistics, and that is a good opportunity to look the multinational enterprise in a granular data way. And the other example is in relation with the North American trading value added. And in this case, again, we have another tool for the memorandum of uh, a MOC that was signed in October 14, 2016. And this gives us another opportunity to develop a supply and use tables for the North American region, and the other is in relation with the exchange of the experience and methodologies to improve it, and of course to look good practices. And this idea gives us again another possibility to look the global value change for the researchers, and to extend the analysis to disseminate information on data about the work that we did with our colleagues from Canada and United States. And this is a trilateral project with multi-year initiative that the main views is to produce regional trading value added database. And of course, these objectives give us some outcomes of trade reconciliation. And this is another point when we are talking about sharing data. We have the opportunity to share and to have a reconciliation data. And the challenge was how to treat with the confidentiality. And of course, with the views of these three countries, we have to to protect the information, but at the same time, we have to look the views of confidentiality of each country, and that means that we have to make some specific process and get the and to put the information in aggregated levels, but of course, according with the aims that we had to produce these trading value added indicators and to produce the regional supply and use tables. And that means at the same time that we have the opportunity to look at specific transactions, but the best idea is that we could share very granular data, and we could look asymmetries at different levels, but in each country makes their own process to get that information and we have the opportunity to compare. And in this case, we could see the sample trade Mexico imports versus Canada exports, and the southbound trade Mexico imports with USA exports. And of course, well, I have not to read everything, but we did a new general method and some specific documents that give us the opportunity to not only to share, to look time series from one hand, but at the other hand, to has a reconciliation in relation with the specific data. And of course, another thing is this gives us a more accuracy in relation with some specific variables, and you could hear that the blue columns are in relation with the original asymmetries, and when we share that information at the different levels, including as the multinational enterprises give us the possibility to reduce these asymmetries in 53% in 2012 and 61 in 2014. And of course, this effort give us the opportunity to close our results in relation with the rest of the world and the transactions that we have. On the other hand, this is the southbound trade, Mexico import with the USA export. And again, we have another good result in this practice to share the information in a way to protect the confidentiality, but at the same time to obtain a more granular and more precise data between three countries. And of course, we have some challenge. We have to, in the case of Mexico specifically, we have to take advantage of the data published in relation with the financial statement, sales expenses by firms that and process according to the Mexican system of national accounts, and of course to share data with more granular views and with the we are using, of course, a unique business identifier of the microdata to put inside of our business register and to obtain more results according to the levels of confidentiality stipulated in the law of national system of statistical and geographical information. Well, my last highlight is we have other instruments, we have another experience, but we always find for the users the ways to produce information in relation with different topics according and protecting our law, but at the same time to satisfy the needs that has our users. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will expect some questions in relation with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco. That was a very interesting presentation on data sharing and how it is possible, and sort of some of the challenges too in that. So we've had three interesting presentations there, two really about how to better present or make the presentations about multinationals more interesting, and to highlight the actual transactions of both the foreign multinationals and the domestic ones. We saw that in both the Canadian presentation and the Dutch one, looking at Dutch multinationals and then foreign-owned multinationals, and similarly for Canada, the same perspectives of Canadian multinationals and foreign-owned ones. And really, we saw, certainly from my own perspective, I would have seen the importance of that the foreign-owned multinationals have on exports. They explained an awful lot of them, and so on. We see it right through low levels of employment relative to the other actors in the economy, and so on. So, Jennifer, do we have many questions or observations in the chat?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Michael, and thank you to the presenters for very interesting presentations. We have a couple in the chat, and while I'm bringing those up, if you would like to put anything in for discussion, please go ahead and do so now. So the first comment comes from John Verinder from Eurostat, and it's directed towards the first presentation by Statistics Netherlands. He thanks you very much for the presentation, and notes that we may need to be careful with the use of financial statements for investigating reinvested earnings. The COPC approach applied to corporate data is not fully in line with the SNA ESA, where particularly for capitalization, the borderline of the R&D and IP. Some policy users try to adjust the national accounts data themselves using the corporate data, but they rarely get it right. And the detail is often insufficient in public financial statements to identify the R&D, IP, and its associated depreciation. So that was the question for Statistics Netherlands. And then the other question in the chat comes from UNSIAP Pinar. Do you have a team working on anonymization? So this is directed towards Francisco and the use of the confidential data that what Francisco discussed. I guess maybe I'll add from my perspective, a couple of comments regarding both the Statistics Canada, Statistics Netherlands presentation. It really, as Michael said, highlights the value of highlighting and breaking out additional information with regards to both foreign controlled units and domestic MNEs. And you notice that Statistics Netherlands looked at it from the institutional sector accounts, whereas some of the presentation by Statistics Canada looked at, say, gross value added broken down by foreign controlled units and Canadian controlled MNEs. And again, this is all part of options in the guidance notes that will be circulated for comment. And for Mexico's presentation, it was quite interesting looking at innovative ways between this kind of public-private partnership and the MOU and getting at some maybe more confidential data and how they went around and with the company's agreement with looking at these data. So that's kind of I think a really innovative approach. So perhaps I'll turn it back over to, I don't know if Ronald from Statistics Netherlands wants to try to answer the first question while we wait for more comments in the chat.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, certainly the CLPC data, there can be problems with it, that is clear. I think when you look at our exercise, we also saw just a lot of, let's say, local issues with data and with data adjustments done, not necessarily methodological questions, not methodological problems. So I think we may have had adjustments relative to COPC, but it may also be partly just a reflection of situation in the Netherlands. So this is not 100% that we say, okay, COPC is not usable. So as a matter of fact, I think if you look at the more specific methodological component, that was not particularly conclusive, is that would lead to large adjustments. But still, of course, if you're purely depending on bookkeeping records, that can always deviate from national account perspectives and principles. So that's always going to be difficult, for sure.
Thank you, Ronald. Does the same question, I wonder, apply to Canada? Perhaps Eric would give us some perspective on that too. Or have we lost him?
No, I'm back. Sorry about that. No, this remains always a challenge. I guess, as I mentioned in my presentation, to convert from survey-based information and business surveys to our actual balance of payments SNA concept is quite challenging, and that's this reconciliation between the micro level of business entities and what it is that want to measure on an SNA basis, which requires a fair amount of adjustment at the macro level, and the strategies to actually align both is quite challenging in some areas to redistribute those adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, if I may,
question.
before we move back to Francisco, there was actually another comment coming in from Sanji from UK for Statistics Canada. Perhaps Eric would like to address it now. And actually, it's kind of picking up on what you said about your reconciliation. Basically, how do you reconcile establishments for your supply use tables and enterprises for institutional sector counts in terms of cross-border? And are you able to get all the statistical data that you need?
Now, along the line of what I just described, for example, for our merchandise trade activity, we do connect our customs information to our business register at the establishment level, and then we can roll it back to the enterprise level. But there are issues again in migrating, the merchandise trade custom-based concept into a BOP-based concept when it comes to applying the BOP adjustment at the establishment and enterprise level. So this is something that we haven't done yet for some of the economic variables, one of it being the international trade. So more to come on that, but certainly quite of a challenge to reallocate those BOP adjustments, which are essentially approached from a product space as opposed to an entity-based concept.
Okay. Francisco, can I wonder, I think you've asked some other questions as well, Jennifer. Maybe you might repeat them. Could you? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Basically, the one question for Francisco from the chat was, do you have a team on working on now I can't say it, to anonymize the data? And actually, I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit from my perspective more on this MOU that you've developed between the public-private MOUs about the sharing of the confidential data and what you can publish and not.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, follow the law. This is one thing that we are trying to look. And in this case, in the case of the national statistics in my country, the law gives us some specific points to look. Sorry. And we have different programs. We have programs for economic census. We have programs for household surveys. We have programs for economic surveys. And of course, we have to anonymize, and we have some specific algorithms and rules to put the information in anonymized way, and this is part of our law restrictions in relation with confidentiality. But at the same time, we have the opportunity to to process this information for the users at the most granular data. And in this case, we have two ways. One is we could process the information for each establishment, and we try to anonymize the information according with the research that the user has. And on the other hand, we have special, and we call here the laboratory data, that in that laboratory data, the researchers or the institutions could go to get, let's say, establishment by establishment, but at the same time, at the end, they have to report us what kind of indicators or information they has to publish. And in that moment, we have to look the law again to just to keep the confidentiality of the data, and we could give them the information not one by one enterprise or establishment. We have to look that this information could use in the view of the main aim of their researchers. So this is the two ways that we have on that point. And probably I lost the other questions, but uh, the agreements with the companies. Well, yes, we have again when we are looking and we publish the information about the light automotive. Well, we have a specific memorandum of understanding in relation to give probably the mark, for example, General Motors cars, and for some specific data, we publish the information, the authorization of each company. So we have to speak with each company, and we have to put together with the others multinational enterprises, and of course we have to agree how to put and how to publish the information by each enterprise, and that give us another way they agree to publish at the same time to not produce some changes in the market, any kind of market, and to give the opportunity to one enterprise to another to get the difference or to has different competence, or to what we have to avoid the idea of or to impact the market in relation with the activities that they give us information and we publish by enterprise. So we have to avoid that kind of things, and it's very tricky. But at the same time, we have to look in that way the opportunity to get a granular data. Thanks.
Thank you, Francisco. I just wanted to ask one question myself, Jennifer. I see there's another question in the chat, but I wanted to ask Ronald just about the time series in the imports and exports of intellectual property. It seemed to me to be very stable for the Netherlands, and I was trying to understand why that would be the case, because I expected it to be a bit more just big transactions and that they would occur periodically rather than having a steady state of, relatively steady growth over the years in these imports and exports in the Netherlands. So if you have anything to say, Ronald, I'd really appreciate that. Other than that, we can pick up on the chat then.
Yes, I'm not entirely sure about your question. We have very erratic impact because of a small number of large transactions around 2013, 14, and 15. So it would have been very stable without those flows, but because of some of those flows, we have large fluctuations in imports.
Perhaps I'm mixing up the royalties and the licenses, is it, with the transactions in the IP itself? Is that it? Maybe.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Overall, I mean, there is really. I presented it relative to GDP, which makes it then relatively small. So you see that around 2015 the series of output does increase, but indeed in terms of output and costs, it's not particularly large. The main issues really are in international trade and services, and the cost of fixed capital funding.
Okay. Thank you, Ronald. Jennifer, do you want to?
Yes, the last comment is from Uruguay, from Lourdes. She raises a very good point, which we actually try to really help concretely define in the guidance note on M&Es. But she points out that for Latin American countries, the responsibility of national accounts and balance of payments actually resides in the central bank. So they benefit from having both statistics compiled by one entity. But one of the challenges that they found is that to use the concept of control, both direct and the concept of control and influence, the FDI type relationships. And she was wondering if the presenters could elaborate a little bit more on this concept of control versus the FDI concept of control and influence.
Well, that'd be great. And perhaps they might, if they have any concluding comments, they might also give those two at the same time. So probably if you take it in the same order. So can Ronald, maybe, would you like to talk to that question, and then Eric, and then Francisco?
Yes, while we're looking at, well, what we compiled the sector, we are basing this on the business register. And in the Netherlands, the business register and the units are linked basically in the, well, what can be called clearly controlled. So the 50% threshold. So we're not really looking here at influence. We are purely looking at entities that are clearly controlled by the foreign multinationals, and then that is the multinationals that we identify. And then if you, for example, look at the reinvested earnings that you have, well, we can have reinvested earnings also in the Dutch multinationals, for example, if there is a relatively small investor, but that would not be part of the foreign multinational sector. So we're really looking here at the 50% rule as control for making subsectors.
Thank you, Ronald. Eric?
Yeah, thank you. Same here in Canada. We stick to the control concept for that first round, I guess, of development. That being said, the way that we constructed the frame, we did include also the 10 to 50% type of influence entities that are part of our FDI concept. So there could be a possibility to expand the scope of this M&E down the road to include the activities of those firms. But for now, I guess there's no immediate plan in doing so. But I guess the infrastructure that we did put in place could allow for such expansion eventually. But for sure, we're sticking to the control concept for both SNE and BOP. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Francisco, for Mexico?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, of course, this is a very good question. And of course, in our case, we have to link different sources. In our case, we have economic census, economic surveys, and the administrative registers come from the customs, and we have to cross this. But in the case of the surveys and the economic census, we have a specific question about the control from abroad companies, and that means how many shares is controlled by the external companies in relation with the same company, but in the resident in our territory. And that means one of the criteria that we have to look in relation with the transactions that they have, and of course the opportunity to know the influence in relation with the decision about the production, the export, and other things. This is a general answer. Of course, it's more complex is more complex than this procedure that I explained now. But if Lourdes wants to speak with me, of course I could share a methodology with her. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Jennifer, any other comments?
No, Michael, I think the presenters are off the hook now. Eric and Roland and Francisco, they were wonderful presentations. So I think I can pass the floor back to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Jennifer. I think just to briefly summarize, I suppose, our entire session, we've had some really interesting discussions. Like at the outset, we looked at the work of the Globalization Task Team. We had a good summary of our work presented by Branko. We then got into the CIF-FOB and this valuation of imports and exports. And I really feel, I think that this is quite a technical issue. And if I was to sort of say, well, what are we missing in this debate? And I think what we are missing is evidence. And I think that's what we are looking for next. Like in the presentation I gave of the findings of the survey, we have 42 countries that have agreed to engage in a more detailed and exhaustive analysis of the impact of changing to using the invoice value. Now, up till now, we haven't really seen what the difference is, and nothing that I presented today gives us really an indication of the scale of the changes that might occur. And I think that's the big issue now. And I think this debate is going to get more interesting, I think, once we get some, I suppose, better evidence of the impact of the change. And let's see where that brings us. Just beyond that, then, like we had some very good country presentations from Moldova and Serbia, but both positive. So they were, I think they were both arguing rightly, I think, for the change. But there are problems for other countries. There's no doubt about that, and we saw that in the overall survey responses. Jens gave us a good overview then of the state of play really with the CIF-FOB and the arguments again for why the invoice value might be the route to follow. We then changed horses to a degree with the presentation from Eurostat on the European network of M&E enterprise coordinators, and really what Tatiana introduced there, we've really followed those themes right through, because she's talking really about the Eurogroups register, the M&E data that's been looked at by that Eurogroups register, and also by the people who are involved in the LCU networks, and the whole range of business statistics, macroeconomic statistics, and so on. The agents or the people involved in these separate silos in some ways of our statistical systems, how they have to work in a cross-cutting way to resolve and to understand the M&Es. And we see that same theme then in the presentations of Netherlands and also of Canada, where we're constantly talking about the use of tech, the trade and enterprise characteristics, where we're using combining a sort of a register view of companies with the trade data, trying to associate the companies with the trade to give us a better view of international trade, and then looking at other enterprise data, whether it's FATS or R&D data and so on, to inform our views of what multinationals are doing in either the Netherlands or in Canada. And I think it just shows how important it is to have a broad view on how we can better understand multinationals, who are at the root of globalization as we see it in our statistics. So that they were good presentations, I think, that illustrated the value of this cross-cutting approach to understanding these large corporations. And finally, we had from Francisco the view on the importance of data exchange and how it's assisted the work in the North American TIVA work, and also this light automobile work. and then trying to pull the data together where you have different solutions to dealing with confidential data. In other words, do we suppress certain elements of it? Do we aggregate to a higher level to deal with it? You know, there are different ways of dealing with confidentiality, and they were followed in his examples. We could see that Canada do it one way, the US do it another, and Mexico another. But still, he was able, or they are able to combine this data and deal and address with the asymmetries that are there in their trade. So we can see the benefits of this exchange of data. And I suppose ultimately we all know that it is the exchange of data that's going to help us really resolve a lot of the issues around globalization. It's going to be very difficult to do it on our own. We really need to collaborate, and that's clearly coming out of this. Either it's collaborating across institutions, our own institution, or across the national institutions, or across the countries of, say, the European Union, or whatever. It's all about this collaboration and how it can happen most effectively. So that's sort of my summary. I just mention as well just that point about the LCU network as well, and how important that would be if something, probably not as with the same legal framework, could be encouraged, but certainly that type of approach to looking beyond just the European Union from an LCU type perspective or a large corporation's perspective, and how that could help in understanding, I suppose, these multinational corporations internationally, not just within the boundary of the European Union, as is the case in our discussions today. And Rami said that the UNECE will be, I think, convening a meeting at some stage to try and advance this point, and this will come through in the notes to the meetings. So that's all I have to say. I don't know, Jennifer, have you anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you, Michael. I think you summarized it very well. Just to I say no, and then I have one thing. Just to let you know, we, as mentioned by Branko at the first presentation, very shortly, there'll be posted 2 guidance notes, one on the treatment of M&Es and one on the treatment of SPEs for public global consultation. Will be posted on both the BPM update webpage and the UNSC update webpage for the SNA, shortly within the next week or two. So be on the lookout for that.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Just to say that if people have any other questions that occur to them in the meantime, please write them or send them to national.accounts@un.org, and they will be addressed to the speakers. Just to say to you that the final session will be on post-COVID-19 and looking forward from there. And this will take place tomorrow, beginning at 1300 hours Central European time, and whatever time that corresponds to wherever you are. And I'd like to thank Jennifer for her assistance with all of this, for her moderating the meeting. I'd like to thank all the session organizers, the presenters, and the interpreters, and Sasha and his team as well for dealing with the technical issues. And that's probably all the people I want to check, and Teomira and Rami, of course. And so with that, I think we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.